Literally, like, there is nothing down there. Thought I'd climb a mountain just for the sake of climbing a mountain. But what we're gonna do today is just go over camera basics. The basics of how to use this thing. I'm gonna do five simple things to get you started using manual settings on this camera. Where are we gonna start? Shutter speed, ISO, aperture, white balance, and then focal length. Those 5 things to get you going using manual settings. Start with number 1, shutter speed. Shutter speed is literally just the amount of time the shutter is open for. For example, this is 1/1600th of a second. See how it's just like really quick? Whereas, I'm gonna dial it right back and do, say, 1 second. You can hear the... So the difference with that is just how long the actual shutter is away and exposing the image. With mirrorless, it's literally just the same thing without the shutter. We just call it shutter speed because that was how it was originally done. Next up we have ISO, which is the light sensitivity of your sensor. So the more sensitive it is, the more the light will react with it. So essentially, like, if you're shooting a low ISO, it's gonna need more time to expose the image, where if you bump the ISO up really high, it's a lot quicker to take that content in. The lower your ISO, the better the image quality will be, whereas the higher the ISO, the grainier it'll be and the less quality of the actual file you'll get. So later on we'll learn how to balance those out to get the perfect image. Alright, next up we have aperture, which is the actual amount of light that gets let in through the lens. So inside your lens you have an iris, which allows different amounts of light to come through. So it's essentially like a spiral that closes. So the least amount of light, the higher your f-stop, your aperture will be. The wider it is, the faster the lens, and the lower your f-stop will be, your aperture will be. But next, we'll talk about white balance. So white balance is essentially the color and the tone of your image. So your eyes do this naturally. You don't even notice it happening, but cameras, they're just machines. They're just trying to like figure out what the actual conditions are. And like, fair enough, auto white balance is pretty good a lot of the time. But if you want to get more specific about your shooting, then it's something to really look into. Like, right now it's partially cloudy, so I'd probably go on one of your settings, somewhere between sunny and cloudy. It just makes it a little bit more deliberate. So you know what you're shooting, you know what color cast you're going for, but realistically, you can just use anything and adjust that in post. But it's better to do it first in camera, which will save you time later. That's what I do anyway, because I don't like sitting in front of a computer for hours and hours. What was the last one? Focal length. Focal length is literally your zoom. So right now, I've got 24, and it's zoomed right out, 105 zoomed right in. It's essentially what I'm focusing on. So the lower your focal length, the wider the shot's gonna be. Whereas if you get a zoom lens, you might have a 200mm lens, you can zoom right in on things. It's just, your focal length is just your zoom. That's the basics of those, but let's go and talk about the balancing of those elements out. So your aperture and your shutter speed are the two that you're gonna balance out. How much light I'm letting in with how wide the aperture is, and what shutter speed I'm aiming to get. So for instance, I'd be shooting this on ISO 100, aperture 8, because I want as much of the range and focus. And I'd look there and be like, that's not gonna work. That's not gonna work, because currently my light meter says I should be shooting at about a 30th of a second. So I'm gonna bump up my ISO real quick, just a little bit, to 200. And then we go, 60th of a second. I have a tack sharp image, wide focal length, wide depth of field, and the right shutter speed, so that there's no camera shake. If I was going to shoot, what are we going to shoot? This little thing. Can you see that? There we go. Yep. So if I was going to shoot this branch, it could be, it's just a branch. But let's talk about that. I want to zoom in on that. So I'm focusing on that. I want to blur out the background. So I'm gonna lower the aperture right down. For this one, the lowest it goes is 4. And because of that, because I've lowered it down, it's letting more light in, so it allows me to, I can drop the ISO down to 100 again, and I can shoot at a faster shutter speed. So I'm gonna probably be able to shoot at 200, zoomed right in at f4. Yep. There we go. Background's completely blurred out. This is focus sharp, 200th of a second, ISO 100. Oop, that is straight down. Now, it seems like a lot to take in, and it is. It's a lot to learn, and the biggest way to learn to do this is to get out there and do it. Take a bunch of images, try different things, shoot different things, and be like, oh, that worked, or oh, that didn't work, my image is blurry, why is that? And come back to this, and re-go over this a couple times. So realistically, your white balance, I'd worry about that last. Your focal length is just your zoom, so that's just figuring out what you're actually focusing on. The balancing act becomes between your ISO, which is your image quality, your aperture, which is how much light you're letting in on that image, and your shutter speed, which is how long the shutter is going to be open for. Balancing those three, it's a bit of a tricky thing, and it takes a lot of practice, but practice makes perfect. And it might seem like a very basic thing to start when you can just be like, I'm just going to put it on auto and take that shot. But the further we get into this, and the more in depth you get with the camera, a good solid foundation and knowing how your camera works on the basic level is the best way to ensure that you become a great photographer. Alright, so that's the 5 basics. 5 basics of your camera, essentially. Your aperture, shutter speed, white balance, focal length, ISO. In a different order. Anyway, it's cold, so I'm gonna go inside. Actually, I lie. So I'm gonna go take some photos, because this place is really pretty. But I need gloves. And I need to go for a walk, so I've just been standing here talking to a camera for a while. It gets kind of cold doing that. So, what I need you guys to do, go and practice those things. So next week, we'll talk about the next step. Take these basics and build on it. We'll keep building until you're just a bomb photographer. Woo! That light's looking really good. Oh, I'll see you next week, yeah? Peace.